usjcd.edu, right?
Right.
That's like my work email. So I'm getting Zoom through like my school that I
Yeah.
teach at. So I don't know exactly what is like the pro version and what's not, because I've just got all this stuff. So like I've just been trying to utilize it as best I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saw the thing pop up live on YouTube. I clicked it and it took me to the link. That's funny, man. Very
Yeah, it's really cool actually. Cool. I'm gonna post that on Facebook, and who knows? You're probably the most famous person that I've talked to so far, actually. So
well.
here you
I'm
go.
sorry.
Whatever, man. It was cool to hang out with you and like meet you and whatnot for Space City.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
man.
That was fun. I liked Houston. That's where we were. That was a fun city.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah.
cool area.
It's all right. It's hot, man. It's real hot.
Yeah, I don't do well with all that heat. I like it cold up here.
Yeah. Where are you based out of right now?
I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Yep, that is not here at all.
No.
Cool. I'm gonna start recording this here in a second. All right. Well, good morning or afternoon at this point, I guess. So today I am here with Cameron Leach. I met Cameron at a music festival in Houston. It was last year, right? 2019?
Yep.
Yeah, at the Space City New Music Festival. Cameron was a guest performer. He is a percussionist. Probably. Wait, you went to Eastman, right?
Yep.
And you only have your undergrad, correct?
No, I have my undergrad from a place called Capital University in Ohio.
Okay.
My master's at Eastman.
Okay. So you did your master's at Eastman. All right. Well, so like I said, I met Cameron at Space City New Music Festival last year, and he is a percussionist, professional percussionist at this point, and he's just carving a living out by playing percussion. So today I'm just going to try to talk to Cameron about that, playing percussion and sort of what that means. So first off, Cameron, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. The first thing that I really want to dig into is like why percussion of all the things?
Yeah. Well, it's really just because saxophone didn't work out. No, but to be honest, so the whole getting into music thing was my dad's fault. He was a rocker, a guitar player, growing up, and then I started seeing a lot of my family members. I grew up in a really small town. They were all in the marching band, right? So I wanted to be just like my cousin and play the saxophone. And eventually, I stopped practicing. My friends were all drummers, and I flipped over to playing drums, right? But fast forward many years after that, and one thing that I think is unique about percussion, and one of the things that I love about performing as a percussionist, is just how visual of an instrument it is. It's really probably the most unrestricted instrument in terms of your presence on stage and being able to move around. It's the most restrictive in terms of gear, because you're dealing with lots of instruments, and so it's restrictive in some ways and unrestricted in others. But I feel that when I'm on stage, I have a lot of leeway and a lot of wiggle room to kind of do what I want and be a performer, not just a musician, and kind of encapsulate the whole thing. So, the other thing is percussion is a very fresh instrument. It's only been around for less than 100 years in terms of its current context. I mean, really like 70 years maybe or less, especially as a solo instrument. And so, it's exciting because it's so fresh, so new. We don't have a lot of performance practice. We don't necessarily have a standard repertoire. And I think that's actually an advantage, not a disadvantage. It's very hard to get a violinist playing recitals of new music because you're entrenched in Paganini, you're entrenched in all of your, piano trios and these pieces that are part of the rep. Percussion, no one comes to a percussion recital expecting to hear a particular thing because there is no particular thing. It's all new.
Right. That's actually funny. When I was in school, a good friend of mine, he was a percussionist, and he sort of gave a talk to our new music, or our sort of a composers collective thing at my undergrad. And one of the things that he said was, new music concerts for him, it's just like a roll of the dice. Like you literally never know what you're going to get. It's like it could be the coolest thing you've ever seen or heard in your life, it also could just be someone screaming at you for like 20 minutes, you know, like you never know what's going to happen. And I think the coolest thing about like percussion land is that like all of that is like just acceptable, you know, like that's just part of it. And like it's really interesting too for you guys because like everything is an instrument. Like even like your body
Yeah.
is like you could be like if you can make sound with it, you can play music with it.
Right.
I think that that's a really interesting point about just percussion in general.
Hmm. Yeah, we're at an interesting point right now in terms of percussion's development, right? So there are different schools of thought with this particular topic, which is that of performer composers, right? People that are players, but also write their own music, maybe for them to play, maybe for others to play. But there's a debate, right? One side of the coin is that performer composers are typically untrained composers. And so what I mean by that is they haven't studied composition formally in a school context. They haven't studied a lot of music from centuries past, right? But they know that on a marimba, playing two open fifths and arranging them in a particular way to make a minor seven or a major seven chord with an open voicing is possible. And so there are these characteristic sounds that performer composers create, but they don't really like if you analyze the pieces, they don't make a lot of theoretical sense, but it works because it's a visual instrument. So it's almost like people thinking. So the critics of that basically say it's not real music, right? On the other side of that, we have people saying, we have other people writing music that are composers first and don't understand the idiomatic feel of the instrument. So then you get impossible pieces written. But a lot of people say, well, that's the real music because it's coming from their head. It's not coming from a point of what feels good in the hands, you know, and really the answer's somewhere in between that, right?
Sure,
I mean, it would
sure.
be beautiful to have it would be beautiful if Bartok had written for the marimba. It didn't happen because it wasn't around. It wasn't in that context. It would be nice if Stravinsky wrote for it. Wasn't around. So, you know, we want pieces by Jennifer Higdon. We want pieces by Andrew Norman and these young composers, living composers. But at the same time, we're getting a lot of pieces from our own professors in our universities. But there are critics of that. There are critics of everything about this. But we're at an interesting point. All that to say, there is no standard repertoire. There is a young art form here, and we're taking what we can get.
Hmm.
You know.
Right. I understand that. You know, I think that to me, actually, it's like the fact that you guys don't have a standard repertoire. I don't know. Maybe it's just because like I studied composition in school, but like I find that it's just this like blank canvas in a way. And on the sort of composer side of things, you know, I can relate to like giving somebody something that's just impossible to play because it was just some idea I had, you know. And actually, it's been since I started working with percussionists that I've started to think more about the aesthetics of like the piece. So, like, what does it actually look like? You know, how do they look when they perform it?
Mhm.
And you know, in a way, it's like I feel like that's actually a really old concept because, for instance, it's like harp technique comes from this idea that you have to look pretty while playing the harp. Like you just have to, you know. That's why they have all those like fluid motions when they're like stroking the harp, you know.
Right.
But it's this really old idea of what you look like matters, and then somewhere along the way, it's like that kind of gets lost, and I feel like it's reemerged in the past 100 years or so. And you know, you guys as percussionists, kind of, again, I think because sound can be achieved from so many different objects that you as percussionists sort of have embraced this like choreography in a way, you know. Um, and it's really funny too. So you mentioned that like marimba just didn't exist for some of these composers, right? Which I mean is a very true thing. You know, personally, I feel that if guys like Beethoven had access to a drum set, like that guy would have written the most metal of music in like the 1700s. You know, because it's just like Beethoven and these older classical composers who we sort of see now as these like highbrow music that kind of puts you to sleep. Like they really were writing hardcore music for their time, you know? And it's just I think that had they had access to some of the modern instruments that we have today, things would have been vastly different for them, you know. You bring up Stravinsky. Uh, as far as I know, he's one of the first guys to ever actually start writing for percussion. What was that piece? The Soldier's Tale. I always forget the French name.
Yeah,
It's basically a drum set, right? He just broke it up between like different players. Have you ever played tackled that piece before?
I have not. No, I know that. I mean, that's something we kind of study in history
Sure.
percussion classes, and it's really the first instance of a multi percussion setup in a sort of mainstream piece like that. You know.
Right. Now, can you kind of briefly go into what that sort of means, multi percussion setup?
Mhm. Yeah. So, in percussion, we have pitched and unpitched instruments. And so, pitched instruments, your marimbas, xylophones, vibraphones, etc. And that could range through tuned bowls, it's anything that's tuned. And then unpitched instruments being metals, woods, and skins. So you have drums as skins, metals being cymbals, pots and pans, etc. And woods being like wood blocks or wooden slats, temple blocks, etc. So a multi percussion setup is something that combines really any number of these things. It's more than one instrument. So you could technically say that a tom and a snare drum is a multi percussion setup. But by and large, when you refer to multi percussion, you're probably going to get, I don't know, a vibraphone with a pair of bongos, a suspended
Sure.
cymbal, some wind chimes, some sort of mixture of these instruments. But it's, in Europe, they use the term setup a lot. They'll call it, a piece written for setup or large
Hmm.
setup. And then, in the US, we tend to use multi percussion a lot. So, but yeah, all of it, it really just means a varied set of instruments.
Sure. I imagine it's kind of like the difference between like a trap set and a drum set. I mean, it's like there's really no difference. It's just
Mhm.
the name of what you call it.
Yeah.
Um, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
And one part about multi percussion is that it's a thing you kind of learn in college. The first time you ever play a multi percussion piece, your professor is always going to rip you for one thing, and that is, why did you pick the setup that you did, right? So a composer doesn't typically write a diagram. You just
Right.
get lines of music, and it says, here are your instruments, and then you have to figure out what works best. And so if you have this instrument over here at a different height than this one, et cetera, and it's not ergonomic, and you have to reach and do weird things, that's like automatically you're getting docked from your professor, right? Let's say.
Right.
But it's
Right.
it's true because like when you get into a context and you're reading through a piece like that, you want everything as close and compact and easily accessible as you can have it. So, yeah, that would be like an interesting challenge with multi percussion. One thing that I think is funny as a performer, again going back to visual percussion, is that if I know that I can reach this instrument and I can intentionally put it further away from me so that it looks more dramatic, I will do that because you're showing like almost an intentional struggle or an intentional drama on stage. Like I have a piece for two snare drums, and instead of putting them right next to each other, I put them as far apart as they can go that I can still reach them, and it almost is an interaction or a conversation between two very opposing forces because of the distance between the drums.
Right.
So it's almost a little bit of staging and theater in a way as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's actually a really interesting concept. That seems to be a one of the sort of big principles of modern music is like the performance, the actual performance aspect of it. The what you said, the theater of it. The theatrics. I remember when you put on your concert at Space City. I mean, that was like a big part of your concert, and like it was effective though. It didn't detract from the actual concert. It enhanced it. It enhanced like the experience of everything. Um, I think that again, that's just a big part of like percussion, like what you guys do. It because like it seems that you don't have as much to work with in terms of pitch, for instance, right? That's not really true. I mean, you guys have pitched percussion that you can make specific pitches, right? But I think that because of the nature of just sound and timbre in general, it's almost as if that like it's not like you need that extra thing, but it's like that extra level of it just enhances all of like the timbres that you're hearing and all the colors that are just coming out of whatever setup you have.
Yeah. Well, no, it's almost just like we'll take what we can get. Like people show up to violin concerts, they show up to piano concerts because of knowing the rep, knowing the pieces. And so we need to do everything we can to whatever it is, get people to our shows or popularize our music, whatever your end goal is here. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to have the option of using a visual element. I will say that the Space City recital you're talking about, I hate calling it a recital, God forbid. The show, right?
Yeah.
That was I think I did like a shorter set. I probably did like an hour of music or something like that. And it might have all been continuous. I'm not entirely sure, but
I think it
something.
was.
Yeah, something that I've been working on is how far can we take this? So there is, and how far can we cross it over as well into other worlds? There's a specific genre of music, obviously theater music, right? Theatrical percussion. But a lot of that lives in that new music sort of esoteric, like not just strange, weird music world. And I love that stuff, but I can't take that everywhere. You can't play that for general audiences. So it's like, how can I get involved in theater music in an interesting and accessible way and pair that with some of this other stuff and create a program that feels like a show, feels like a touring production. It doesn't feel like a recital. Now, obviously, you need a lot of infrastructure for that. You need lighting designers and all this kind of stuff. But it's like the slow and steady process of almost emancipating. Here we go. Emancipating the sort of standard percussion practice and standard percussion recital into something bigger. And
Right.
I don't think we've gotten there yet, but there are a few of us that are really shooting for that, and I think that's the direction that the popular form of the art needs, because the academic form of the art is always going to live in academia and will always do okay because it is funded,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that is, while in itself an entirely different discussion, like it is a very real threat, I think. The academics of this stuff, it's like that will never go away. And like you're right, it will always be there because like it's like there is always a place that will be made for it, even if people don't go to it. It's like it still exists and it's there. Whereas like the actual performance side of things, that can come and go. Because it just depends on like your audience, and like, does anybody actually want to listen to this stuff? Yeah. That's again a very real threat. Again, as a composer, I try to, like, I have to walk that fine line because it's like sometimes there's like a really cool idea that I think is awesome, and like, I just want to go into that idea, right, and see how much I can get out of that idea, right? But it's really not, 9 times out of 10, it's not that interesting to listen to. Whereas like, sometimes you just gotta like write that nice little poppy sounding piece of music that like draws people.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you have to figure out a way to fund the art you actually want to make. That's
I think it depends on like, number one, do you want your music to get played? So that means you got to study the performer side of it, right? And write music the performer wants to play. And then number two, do you want it to be heard? So I could play it, and I could play it for an audience of one person, right? But if you make your music to the point where the general public wants to hear it, then it'll get heard. It's like, but at the same time, I recognize that some composers, it doesn't matter to them for their music to get heard. It just matters that they've created the music because it's what they wanted to create. And that's fine too. It's just, what's your goal? And as long as you know that and you understand the consequences of your goal and what that might lead to, it might lead to no one hearing your music. And if you're cool with that, I'm cool with that because I like the piece, as a performer. Right. So,
yeah, it really is like a fine line that I think both performer and composer have to walk down, because I'm sure like you've got pieces that like you absolutely love, but just no one cares about, and like it's a shame. Yeah, it's a shame because like you don't play them because like no one cares about it, right? But it's like it's an amazing piece of music, it's just no one wants to hear it, which is so sad.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I worked the hardest for those on stage too. I mean, it'll be an 11-minute piece in 4 parts, multiple simultaneous tempi going on in certain variations, all sorts of madness, right? It took me 6 months to just learn the notes. And that's the piece that everyone in the audience is like,
yeah, you get like a smattering of applause and you're like, thank you, table 6.
And then I go up there and I dance around on stage and act like I got a bouncy ball and do body percussion. Everyone loses their minds. It's
right.
Okay, well, priorities, So
I
either got to find a way to package that hard piece better and make it more accessible for this audience, or it might just not work for this audience and it might have to go on an academic recital only. Kind of sucks.
We find that word again, recital.
Yeah, there it is.
Yep. Yeah. So, okay, most of your experience here, I guess, most of your experience, as far as I know, with music is more so as like a modern performer.
Mhm.
Again, the history of percussion doesn't really extend that far back. For the most part, like Mozart and Haydn, they kind of had timpani. That
Mhm.
was about it. It's not really until like I guess like 1920s really that we start to see percussion be like a big deal in the academic world. I think that the sort of pop world kind of accepted it a little bit earlier with like drum set and like jazz, for instance. There was this whole like thing about the sort of Afro-Cuban rhythms and whatnot, and like that it was easy to dance to, right? So people could like latch onto that, and that's becomes slowly is becoming more of an accepted idea in academia. I really think that Stravinsky, I guess, is the first guy to really start exploring those ideas. Um, Now, you as a performer, what do you what do you actually prefer? Do you prefer these sort of more academic, esoteric things, or these more sort of popularized, widely accepted types of
Mhm.
pieces?
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, yeah, of course it depends on where you're playing in your audience. For me, I grew up as a drum set player first, and so you can already see where this is going to go. Like I grew up playing punk, and then I went to metal, then I went to death metal, and I went to the extreme that I could go to. I love the energy of being on stage. This is what I
Mhm.
thrived on. So yeah, I mean, when I get on stage, I want to play the music that people want to hear. And so in order to sort of bridge the gap between my love for academic music and kind of this crazy marimba stuff, if you want to call it that, like that you would see on a senior recital, master's recital,
Yeah,
to
right.
bridge the gap between that and then like playing pop music on marimba, which I think is like a little extreme, and not so satisfying. I That's why I play a lot with electronics, because I just think that like I can expand everything I do a millionfold with whatever I'm playing with. And as long as my miking on stage is good, or like the sound blend is good and it comes off well, I can get a particular piece written for me that really showcases certain styles. So like I have a 10-minute, 12-minute piece that's like EDM, right? And I have a
Yeah.
ginormous setup and I'm running around and I'm playing like with this EDM track. You could hear this piece in a club. And so I love that, and it's enabling me to kind of bridge the gap between those worlds. But if I had to pick one, I would leave the academic music behind, which was a great way to study, a great informative practice for me to go to. But inevitably, I like to be on stage where people are enjoying it and they're not sitting there like scratching their heads, you
Yeah,
know.
right. Like, what does it mean?
But
Like,
I would have to go that direction if I had to make a choice. But again, like this is the issue we're having in the
sure.
percussion world right now. We're at this crossroads. There's all this infighting going on, and there aren't enough there aren't enough people that have made themselves have performing careers to really be able to speak on this from a career standpoint,
Mm.
from a standpoint of someone who's done it. There are a lot of professors, right, who have done 3 degrees and gone straight back into academia, and
Yeah.
they've never had a performing career. And those are some of the loudest voices sometimes. And it's, of course, they're on the side of academia. And
Right.
of
I mean,
course,
that's their bread and butter. It's like,
yeah, but it's like I feel like if those people had gone out and taken 5 years off and tried to create a performing career, they would understand that there's another side of this. And so
yeah.
I'm on that side, I feel. Um, but I also see where both sides are coming from.
Oh,
Uh,
sure. No, I understand that completely, man. It, it's it, you mentioned like there's a lot of infighting kind of in percussion land right now. It's the same thing with like composers.
mhm,
There's so much like people are just are torn between these sort of like popular ideas. Like the acceptance of pop music even into the academic world is still like a new idea, and like
mhm.
a lot of people in like my generation and younger, they're like all for it. Um, because it's like that's the music we grew up listening to. Right? That's the music we grew up playing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like my teachers, very few of my teachers actually like even would analyze the Beatles songs, for instance. They would like, I mean, it's like, it's nice to listen to in the background, sure, but it's like they would just kind of turn their brain off, right, and not engage it, right. And that seems to be a big, just a big deal in music, kind of all around right now. Is like, what is academic and what's not academic, you know? Um,
Yeah, I see a lot of discussions online, actually. I won't name any names,
sure.
but I see a lot of discussions from composers who are theory teachers at schools talking
Yeah.
about the fact that they want to integrate a lot of popular music theory into their coursework because it's actually relevant to someone's career outside of music. And I'm all for that. You know,
Yeah.
I,
Same.
I think a lot of times the old guard, which is what I'll call them, those people, what they need to understand is that I don't think we want to blow it all up. I think we just want to integrate. and that and,
Yeah.
and
Right.
so it's like I don't think we're like radical on this side. I think we're just saying we need to like bring this side in and have a more holistic view of everything. I can just tell you, like, I didn't take jazz theory in college. I had a choice to take my last 2 semesters in jazz or my last two to finish out classical set theory, all that. I took the classical stuff, and that's like my biggest regret because all the songwriting skills, all the harmonization skills, that all came from jazz theory. It doesn't come from more common practice and learning tone rows. While that stuff is great, I
Yeah.
can't
Right.
tell you the last time I ever used that in my real life.
Right. Right.
You know?
I completely understand that 100%. It wasn't until grad school actually that I really started getting into jazz like theory, and then I realized like how much more practical it is, you know. And for me, that's actually been a big deal lately. Is the practicality of all this stuff that we're using, you know, because it's like there is a place for like the 12 tone method and all of these different types of theoretical ways of writing. There is a place for it, right? But it's like it it doesn't need to happen all the time. And the same thing is true for like these sort of like jazzier things or like the popular side of things. It's like there is a place for it. It doesn't need to happen all the time. Something that I've actually been like thinking about lately for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years at this point, is that like drums in general and just the nature of like a percussion line, I guess. Like I have this theory that it doesn't matter what's happening like with the notes or the harmony on top, but it's like if there's like a sick drum beat underneath it, then like people will just automatically like be more into it. You know, there's something about just rhythm that draws people into something. It's like being able just to move suddenly makes everything more accessible. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, case in point is the fact that people are coming out with solo drum set records now, and they're successful. It's
Yeah.
something that you think about, how could that ever be possible? Nate Smith, yeah, like how could that ever happen? Well, it's because, yeah, rhythmic phrasing, masters of rhythm. I mean, it really is. It is a
What was
thing.
what was that movie? Birdman, I think, with Michael Keaton or whatever.
I haven't seen it,
Um,
but I know what you're talking about.
yeah, it's like I can't remember the composer's name for that movie, but it's just drum set the
Yeah,
entire time.
I've heard
Um,
about this. It won whatever.
yeah, it won best film score or whatever that. Yeah, and that was like a big deal. That like shook up the music world. I remember like when that happened, it was like right around the time when Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer. I remember, and like there was just a ton of like stuff happening all over like in the music academia, in that sort of land. But
Yeah,
I think it goes to show though that how important just the idea of rhythm is in music and just art in general. You know?
yeah. And with all this maybe perceived academic bashing that I'm doing or you're doing, which I don't think that's what it is.
Oh
I,
no 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 no.
I think it is worth saying though that without the people studying it, without these academics, I mean, it wouldn't be anywhere. So it's such a valuable thing. I just wanted to throw that caveat in there because
Yeah, right.
I know I've said a lot of things so far. So
Right. No, I agree 100%. It is extremely important to like understand the nature of these things. Again, I think the academics they have a place. It doesn't need to happen all the time. It's the
yeah.
same thing with the popular side of things. Um, so let's see.
Well, one thing I'll say too
Oh yeah.
is we were talking about Stravinsky and kind of the development of percussion, and Stravinsky, Rite of Spring, 1913, like great percussion writing, really intense stuff. And the first time we kind of see percussion get taken out of the back of the orchestra, or or I guess just featured even more, would be 1931 with Ionization by Varese, right? And
Yeah.
so this is the first, I think it's 13 players. This is the first time we see a giant sort of percussion ensemble piece like this. And, one of those things that's worth mentioning is just the cultural melting pot of the jazz, the development of the jazz scene in the South, right? Where you have Chinese toms being imported, you have bongos, you have the Chinese temple blocks being brought in as traps for drum set, which is where the term trap set comes from. And all of that stuff being developed and put together in essentially what is a multi-percussion setup, which turned into the drum set. Then the composer started taking that and seeing that these instruments from different cultures paired well together. So you start getting an ionization with Varese. You get claves alongside bongos. Okay, that's a pretty normal combination. Then you get gongs. Okay, wait, we've gone from Latin to Chinese. And you have all these things in between, military drums. And
Whistles,
that's
sirens, like
oh
everything in
yeah.
that piece. Yeah.
So it's the first time that we start seeing like everything come together, and that was pretty much the birthplace of modern percussion in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Now,
So
I think what's really interesting about that piece is there's hardly any like melodic content to it. It's all like colors and sounds and timbre. And I think that, you know, that's one of the most important aspects of percussion playing is that you guys deal so much more with timbre, I feel like, than any other type of musician aside from the composers, you know, like I think timbre is such an important part of how you guys perceive music, and even down to like the types of drums that you choose. You know, you were talking about like the setup that you choose earlier, uh, and it's like different congas, for instance, have different sounds, right? So which of these congas do I need to use for this particular piece, and so on and so forth. Like you can play that game for hours, you know, days, weeks, even just trying to find the perfect sound. So how do you approach something like that? Like if you were to be, let's say if you were to play ionization, for instance, and you only had to use stuff that you had access to, right? Like how would you approach some of these instrument choices, I guess?
hmm, yeah, that's interesting.
I guess first off, you really couldn't play it because you need to have like gongs and like drums and
I might
whistles.
have almost everything needed, actually.
I,
Believe it or not, in my basement. No,
yeah, I do believe it, man.
minus the grand piano and
Mm,
a couple of the gongs, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I'll kind of be broad about this. So,
sure.
yeah, the biggest thing that we do learn in school is this timbre thing, right? I mean, of course, rhythm and all that, but you very quickly realize as a percussionist that we don't have the same note challenges as people. It's usually like target practice as opposed to, finger placement and all the kinds of
Yeah.
hardcore variables you have on a lot of these other instruments and embouchure, tension and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Right.
So, um, I think very quickly you learn that it's a timbre game, and then from there, yeah, it comes down to like, okay, number one, what instrument are you going to choose, and understanding like what kind of wood produces a darker, warmer sound, how many plies of wood is going to do this, the rounding of the bearing edge on the drum, all that, and then you choose the implement for that, and then you figure out where you're going to strike the instrument with that implement to get whatever sound. So, to train that really just requires a ton of listening and a ton of like criticism and open discovery and all this stuff. Like, I mean, I will just sit down with a drum when I'm learning a new piece on an instrument that I haven't played very much, maybe a particular hand drum, and I'll just experiment for like 2 or 3 hours a day before I even start learning the piece and just work out like what kind of sounds can I make on this. Um, and then another interesting thing is again open discussion with people. So like let's say you're watching your teacher play a bass drum a certain way and it's in the practice room and you're like, okay, and they can tell you, "Oh, play it this way," but then you see them in the orchestra do it. And you realize, "Oh, that bass drum note's with the bass trombone." And so there's like a really sharp attack on that bass trombone's note and then whatever, and you can see, oh, that's why he's playing here because he's getting a little sharper attack on the drum to mimic that. So it's like orchestration, and that's the point that I want to get to is percussion almost becomes an orchestration game, where like if you're playing one instrument in the orchestra, you're with someone else. You're supposed to sound like someone else 95% of the time. You're not probably your own color. In a multi percussion setup, you have, let's say, 10 instruments and you're playing a solo for those 10 instruments, you're orchestrating. You have a singular rhythmic line across different instruments or whatever it is. So I just think that it's so you can't really quantify what that looks like, what the study of timbre as a percussionist looks like. It's this really weird, murky thing that we kind of go through.
Yeah. And
Um,
in a way, it's like that's kind of like where our modern notation system fails, right? Because it's like we can't notate timbre, for instance. Like
yeah,
there are methods that people kind of experiment with, right? But it's almost like you have to relearn how to read music in order to sort of get into those methods of madness in a way. Uh, and it, there's so much freedom, it seems, that's left to the performer when it comes to percussion. Just
yeah,
again, something as simple as like, where do I hit the instrument, right? It's like I know that I need to hit it at this time, but like, how do I hit it? Where do I hit it? How hard do I hit it? What do I use to hit it? All of these different things. It seems like it's most of the time just left up to the performer to sort of figure out like what sounds best. Um, so whenever, like you said, whenever you learn a new piece, you sort of sit down just with an instrument that you're unfamiliar with. If it's for a piece, if it's for an instrument you're unfamiliar with, right? You sort of sit down and just kind of get familiar with the instrument.
mhm.
What are some ways that you kind of go about doing that?
Yeah. Well, I'll say let's take for instance a multi percussion setup, right? Um, because typically that's never going to look the same from piece to piece. If
Mhm.
someone writes a marimba solo, you're playing it on a marimba, and it's not really going to change that much. But multi piece is typically always different unless you specify to a composer, I want you to write for this setup, these instruments set up in the same way as the Xenakis Raybons B. That's what I want.
Right.
And that does happen because it makes your life easier as a touring musician to have the same setup.
Yeah. Right.
But let's
Less
say
moving pieces.
yeah, exactly. But like, let's say I learned a piece last month, and I had like three metal bowls, four bottles, four toms, and then three foot pedals. So it was this really interesting setup, nothing like I'd ever played before. And I started learning the music a little bit, here and there, kind of reading through, first read through. But what I did was just improvise on the setup. Like, just start playing around and feel like, okay, this is what happens. Like, what if I need one hand on my bottles and one hand on my bowls, and then try a couple rhythms, do some things. Okay, now like move to instrument. Now, what if both hands need to go on the bottles, but I need to play this third foot pedal, and then I stand in that awkward position, and it's like, okay, so that's how that's going to feel. And then you
Right.
get to
Yeah.
music, and 9 times out of 10, all those things have to happen. So
Right.
it's good that you improvised, good that you figured that setup out. And then, that would be from a logistics choreography standpoint. If you want to talk about like a timbral standpoint, then the question becomes, what is the composer's goal here? Like, if should the drum pitches all lead up through the bottle pitches, or should they intermingle? And so you start thinking about where the pitches of the instruments, or if they're unpitched instruments, what the timbres are. Should they be similar? Should they be different? Sometimes people say, I want you to play on four drums, and that's all they say. Maybe four skins is a more general term, whatever they want to
Sure.
call it. And then you have to make a decision like, should I have a bass drum, a floor tom, inherently different instruments, a conga, and then a high bongo, all different instruments? Or should I
Right.
have
Right.
two congas, two bongos with skin heads? Those are pretty similar,
Right. Right.
similar sound. So it's like, a lot of that then comes down to calling the composer, if you can, and saying, hey, what was your goal here? And a lot of times, they'll have one in mind. A lot of times they won't. You can figure it out. But, and then in terms of notation and things, sometimes a composer will specify, I want this at the edge or this with this implement. And if it's done in a way that is feasible and possible and it gets the point across,
Yeah.
then I'll
Yeah.
do it. But if a composer over notates me and over restricts me and it doesn't really come off anyways, and it's a lot more effort on my end, I'm going to call them and say, hey, like, can we not do this? Can I do it my way? Because I think it's going to actually come off better. You know, long winded. Oh, I think I lost you. I think you're frozen. You there?
Oh, yeah, I'm there. Are you there?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. You froze
Okay.
for about, I don't know, 30 seconds.
Yeah. I'm getting a message that says my internet connection is unstable. Yet here I am, still stable. But how was I going to say now? You were talking about composers and overnotating. Let's see. Oh, one of the most important piece of advice I ever got, I guess, was like 9 times out of 10, the performer just knows how to make a sound happen way better than you will ever, as a composer, you will ever be able to even conceive that sound, right?
Yeah.
Like you just tell them what you want, the type of sound you want, and like they will 9 times out of 10 just figure it out, you know? So me personally, I always err on the side of like, I guess not enough information because I would much rather have the performer like interpret things, the way that they sort of want. Because like it's all this stuff, like where you perform it, for instance, matters, right? Like different halls are going to sound different. Is it a dead space? There's a live space. And like, these drums are going to sound different in these spaces because of just the way that sound travels in them. And I think that leaving it up to the performer to figure out is 9 times out of 10, the best way to kind of go about some of this stuff. I don't know. Me personally, again, I find that leaving that to you guys will yield better results overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think
Yeah.
we spend our lives doing that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's fun. It's fun for us actually. It's actually less fun for me to be restricted by what a composer wants in the
Yeah.
timbral sense. Because yeah, you want to. That's like kind of our way to put our stamp on a piece in a way.
Yeah. Right. Right. And maybe it's just because most of my performance experience comes from this like jazz and like rock setting where
Mhm.
like, you know, in a similar way to you said you sort of started off by playing drum set basically, and it's like that was the same thing for me. I started playing electric bass in a garage band when I was like 14, and like just figuring it out, like, oh, this sounds good, and this one didn't sound so good. I don't want to do that one again, and like just getting to know your instrument. I think it's really interesting also how you say like getting a new piece and learning how to improvise on like a setup. That's I feel like a lot of classical players don't have that mentality, or at least it's like it maybe it has manifested in a different way. When I was learning how to play double bass, for instance, or just I guess bass in general, this is had to been several years ago. Like when I was learning how to read on the instrument, basically, my teacher would just say like, yeah, pick a key and just improvise in that key, and like learn where all the notes, like learn where they are, and like I don't know, that exercise helped me so much, just being able to navigate my instrument and just figure out like where I'm trying to go, how to get there. Something I
Yeah.
think is really interesting. What you said is like, sometimes like if you have to like bunch up on something, or it's like you have to stay in this really awkward position, and like again, the same thing is true for me, at least going through some of this bass trials, I guess, was like just
Mhm.
learning how to be comfortable in these really awkward positions, and like how to just navigate your instrument. Again, I couldn't imagine doing it with percussion because it's like every piece is just different. Every piece has different instruments. Every piece has different sounds, different goals. Whereas like for me, about half the time I'm playing long tones, so like I can just as long as my note sounds good, we're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like that. It's a blessing and a curse for us. One thing that's kind of funny is when I do get a new multi percussion piece, I'll look at it and I'll be like, no way. I mean, that looks crazy. And so I'll start to learn it. And day one, hopeless. Day two, hopeless. Because also, not only is the instrument different, but the notation's always different. Every composer notates differently. So it's like, okay, so today the four toms are going to be on these lines. Yesterday, for that other piece, they were on these spaces. And then the day before, a composer had another, it was in grand staff, and they had another staff for the toms. So that in and of itself is crazy. So like every time I get a new piece, you're learning a new instrument and learning how to read a new instrument and 50% of that, basically.
Right,
So
right.
it's that is a big challenge for us. And by day 3, 4, 5 of kind of going through a new piece, you start to get your feeling, you get your bearings in that new notation, and it gets easier. And it's an exponential increase because you've done it so many times for other pieces. But I tell you what, it's frustrating. It
Oh yeah.
and there is no standardized notation, and there can't really be because you can never predict what instruments are going to get used. So
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like for instance, if I say hand drum, I'm sure for you that means like there's a million types of drums that could possibly mean, you know. And I think it matters for like the space and the type of piece it is, you know, if it's going to be performed outdoors versus indoors, you know, different. Do you need that sound to cut? Do you need the sound to be a part of like blend more? Like there's so many variables that kind of go into this, and things that composers just like they literally cannot account for. Also, which is fascinating to me. I think I don't know. Percussion just in general is such a fascinating world to just see like the mentality that you guys sort of take with you into pieces and how you approach things. So much of it is just seems like it's trial and error, and like you just kind of figure it out, and then something works, and it's like, oh great, I'm going to do that again.
Yeah, that's a very fair assessment.
I
Yeah.
I one time had a percussionist friend of mine. He sort of said, like, whenever you're writing for percussion, just make it idiot proof. Like, just I hate to put it like this, but these were his words, right? He's like, you know, just assume that whoever's reading it, like that they don't know anything about music, or they don't know anything about like playing something, you know. So just try to make it as idiot proof as possible, which is like one of the challenges that people I feel like have when they write for percussion, because like, you know, how specific should a composer get, and how open-ended should they be, right? Because if it's too open-ended, then the idea of the piece will get lost, you know.
Yeah.
But if it's like you said, if it's too closed, then it's going to be impossible to perform. Now I think that's really interesting. One thing that you said about like, you know, using two stabs, for instance, or like having instruments, they are represented by different lines for different pieces, you know. One thing that definitely pitch instruments have an advantage over, I guess, is that like our notation system hasn't changed much in a long time. Whereas for you, it's like every piece is different, you know. I'm curious, what are some of the most difficult things you don't have to name pieces or composers, but what are some of the most difficult things you've had to read, I guess, and like what made them so difficult?
Goodness, let me think about that. I think it can come in a few different ways. One is, you know, I play that piece Le Corps à Corps where the notation is not defined at all. Like it's written on a staff spatially, you know, high to low, but it doesn't tell you what any of the note heads mean. So like it's up to you on your hand drum to just figure out what sounds you want to make when. But so it's like not aleatoric notation, but kind of is in that way. And it's also impossible. Like there are pieces that are, that's another thing, right? There are pieces that are written for percussion to intentionally be impossible. And that's a very modernist approach and la-di-da, but at the end of the day, I can't play your piece. And whether that's the speed, like you demand, like no, like unwavering 120, whatever, however they want to notate it. And it's like, okay, you've written me 30-second notes in this insane configuration that like no human will play. And so the performance practice now for this piece is that we just start at 60 and a cello through that whole moment, because that's the only thing we can do to try to generate momentum. That's a problem.
Right.
And that's in one of our most revered pieces, Xenakis Rebons B at the end in the coda. So why? You know what I mean? Like, and we act like it's not a problem, but that's a problem because he wasn't working. That wasn't worked out with somebody. So the name of the game for me is like, as a composer, you're alive, and there are many percussionists alive around you. So call somebody, you know, and like let's work this out together and figure out what's going to work. Yeah.
Now that's actually a really interesting sentiment in a way. So you know, there's tons of Facebook groups dedicated just to like setups for different types of things. I have talked or spoke with a lot of like drummers for just various musicals in the area and whatnot. And there's a particular Facebook group page. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's like whenever you have a musical and it's a drum set plus a multi-percussion setup, basically, and it's like there's only one of you, you know, because that's what the budget allows.
Yeah.
So like you got to figure out how to like turn these like two books into one player. And like just seeing some of the ways that people kind of like work around this stuff, you know, I think
Mhm.
it's really interesting how like these different communities have kind of just through the internet gotten together and just kind of like, I use this setup for this because it works, you know, and someone else is like, well, I have taken parts of this setup and done it like this.
Yeah.
And like, there is no like right way to do any of this stuff. There's definitely a wrong way. I found out there's
Oh
a
yeah.
wrong way to write for like for you guys, but there isn't really a right way to do it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and what's funny is that kind of brings me full circle in a way here because in talking about the stuff we were mentioning in the beginning, performer composers, right? The
Mhm.
percussionists that write for percussionists obviously know the instrument, but a
Right,
lot of
right.
times because we're not studied composers, the music itself is not of a high quality. That's a very subjective statement. I
Sure,
understand that,
sure.
but then what's good though is the interactions between percussionists and composers, like real composers, whatever that is, where the percussionist can say, "No, look, so check it out. We can do this crazy flourish kind of thing,"
Yeah,
and where I put my left hand on the accidentals, my right hand on the naturals, and I do what are called double lateral strokes up the instrument. A lot of composers who are percussionists will take that technique and use it in very trite ways in their pieces, just ascending minor seven chords, arpeggiations, whatever. And
right, right.
but the fact of the matter is, it's like sometimes as percussionists we make fun of that and say, "Oh, it's another piece." Like we have this funny thing where some of the pieces are called like uh, "Moonlight in the Desert" or like
Yeah,
under
I know exactly what
underneath
you're
the
talking about.
stars. And it's like this very sort of new age sound with like, yeah, like I'm saying, minor seven chords or add a nine here and there, and you're just arpeggiating, and it's a very kind of dark, mysterious sound. But I will say, and this is something that someone recently told me about, is like if we would have shown Ravel that technique, it would have been a darn good piece of music that came out of
Right,
that. And
right.
it's not the technique that we should fault. It's just the fact that like the people writing it might not understand musically the best way to employ the technique, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that using idiomatic techniques is wrong, because if you look at a flutist, that flutist wants to know that the composer is writing well for his or her instrument, you know?
Mhm.
Um, like as a percussionist, it's better to get a piece that sits well on the instrument, which is why we play a lot of this percussionist composer music.
Right.
But if we showed a real composer those techniques, that's what you want. You don't want them just writing what comes out of their brain, because half the time it doesn't work.
Yeah, right, right. It literally is impossible to sort of
Yeah.
do some of the things that composers think of, you know, which I think that that relationship between composer and performer is extremely important for that reason. And you know, it is really fascinating too, living in this modern world and creating music because, like, you know, you're not in Texas, right? Like,
Mhm.
you are in Ohio right now, but through the wonders of the internet, like I can talk to you about music and like ask you questions of like why, you know, would this work, right? And you can just very bluntly tell me no, and here's why, right? And then ideally give a suggestion as to what could work, you know, and like through that collaboration, you just make a better piece of music overall. Um, I think that you know that seems to be a really current idea because for so long, like modern music was just like stuck in this academic world where like the intent of the composer was everything, right? And it's like you had to do that, um, which that kind of brings me to one of the topics kind of this class is that you said this word earlier, aleatoric music, right?
Mhm.
I'm not sure if my class will have gotten to that term by this point or not, but basically aleatoric music is chance music essentially, right? It's like you don't know what it's going to sound like until you actually do it, basically. um, and that idea kind of lends itself so much to percussion
Mhm.
in a way, but also like, you know, so one of the composers that we talk about in this class is a guy named John Cage, right? Who for percussionist is a big deal.
Mhm.
He definitely was one of the guys that took this music and started to utilize percussion, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think you have a recording of a performance at Eastman, right? Living room music. I think I showed it to my class one time. Um,
I have a recording of that, not from Eastman, but from somewhere.
sure, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Was I in this recording?
Yeah, yeah, it was
Yeah.
you and three other people, I think. I
Yeah.
I don't remember where it was at. It's on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah.
You
That
go
was
to
Yeah, it was from Chautauqua. It was this kind of funny concert we put on. But yeah, living room music's a great piece, and it's another one of those pieces like you don't know. It doesn't tell you what instrument to play,
right,
so
right.
you just assume that the. Yeah, I don't know if I can't remember in the program note if there's anything, but you play on instruments that you would find in your living room, whether it's tapping a magazine or
Like
you know.
opening a newspaper.
Yeah.
There was a point in time where I was really into that idea, and I tried to like serialize like how to play a newspaper. That was a bad idea.
Yeah, I
Man.
don't know. I mean, like all that music is cool. All the John Cage, Lou Harrison, Henry Cowell, all of it's cool stuff. Yeah, I don't know how practical it is, but again, it was like sort of
Sure,
this
sure.
just it was music for their time. I mean, they were using the instruments they could get their hands on, and it did sort of create this idea of found percussion instruments, and
Hmm.
um, it wasn't necessarily academic, but in a way, it was still within its own bubble, if that makes sense. So, like it, you can kind of isolate that music as a thing, and we can see its influence. But it's good that there's that music, and we don't need to write like that anymore, because like we've
Yeah, yeah.
gotten past that in a way, and it's just like
Right, right.
classical music. It's percussion's classical music, really, is what it is.
Right.
Um,
No, that's a really good point, actually. Like, you know, any musician who's like worth their salt would, I I think they might not enjoy that sort of thing. They might not enjoy listening to it, right? But they definitely should like respect it
yeah.
and like understand the importance of it. And it's like even if you don't like that style of music, it's important to understand that like John Cage did it, so you don't have to, right? Like
Right.
they did this so that you don't have to do this now. You can build upon that idea. Um, Ironically enough, though, usually I don't know how we're going to do it this semester, but I always have to give like a listening exam as part of this class, right? And I
Mhm.
always do this thing where I just play random pieces that the class has not heard and just ask like stylistically, where does this belong? Like, is this aleatoric? Is this romantic? So on and so forth. Um, and the piece they always gravitate towards, I always show them living room music, right? And they're always so shocked at how like at that piece and like the sort of rhythms that come out of it, and like they are like inherently drawn to that piece more than like sometimes even more than like those Ravel pieces or like other Cage stuff you could say. But like I think it's really interesting. This kind of leads me back to this idea that rhythm is so important for just people, and like if there is a rhythm that you can latch onto, then like suddenly the masses can like understand that. It's something about just patterns, I think.
Mm.
There's this really interesting book that when was it written? Had to have been 5 or 6 years ago, called On Repeat by this lady named Elizabeth Margulis, I think her name is. I can't
Hmm.
remember where she teaches, but she's like a music psychologist or something.
Okay.
And when she was writing the book, I don't know what she's doing now. When she was writing the book, she was studying how music affects like non-musicians basically, and a lot of it was about repetition. And ironically enough, what they found is that if you repeated an idea, like it was much more accessible to non-musicians,
Yeah.
which I think, I don't know, this it's fascinating to me, the idea of pattern and repetition. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a funny specific point, but in the percussion concerto repertoire, which is young and fledgling, right?
Right,
Uh,
right.
some of the pieces that get performed the most are the ones that have I guess if you wanted to call it a rondo structure, but what I'm really talking is verse chorus here, and
Yeah.
that's the way I look at it. So Jennifer Higdon's percussion concerto, for whatever reason, gets played a lot, and that's because there are licks that return 3 times within the piece. And every time you see the other part of it too is that as a percussionist, we have a visual representation of what's happening, which is really important. So that lick is always on the vibraphone. So anytime you see me go to the vibraphone, after the second time I've done that over there, you can
Yeah,
assume that the
yeah.
third time I'm going to walk over, I'm going to play that lick again.
Right.
And so
That's
there's
interesting.
setting up not only an aural expectation, but a visual
Right.
expectation to match, which is an interesting point. And then another concerto for marimba by Emmanuel Sejourné has in its second movement heck, actually in every movement there is a repeating motive, a repeating chorus actually in those. So, and by and large, those are the ones that the audiences want to hear, and those are the ones that the performers play and that the orchestras program. So I'm just saying, that is absolutely correct. The pieces that are through composed are the ones that don't see the light of day so much.
Yeah, right, right.
And I don't think that's a
It's
problem. I mean,
oh,
I think that's like fine. And a lot of people want to try to force the issue on this. And I don't think you're going to be able to force the issue on a culture that's trained in that music for the last
ah,
100 years of like pop, radio, all that stuff, you know?
right. No, I think that's a really important thing to make note of is that, as a culture, we have definitely been like indoctrinated to hear music a certain way, from like the pitch material all the way down to the form of this music. That's one thing I really try to focus on a lot in my class actually is form
Yeah.
and trying to just extrapolate like where our modern idea of song form came from, for instance. And like this is the mantra of my class at this point, but music has not changed much in about the last 500-600 years. Like
Mhm.
we're still doing the same stuff, just in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Form, for instance, you use the word rondo, right? As my class knows, it's like, man, there's three types of rondos, right? It's like you have the French rondo, which is at an X at the end, right? You got the Italian ritornello, which is the same thing basically, and then you got the German rondo, right? And like they're all literally the exact same thing. They just happen at different time periods, and like it's all here's a section of music, here's a different section, here's that same section of music,
Yep.
here's a different section of music again, and it's like that's it. It's the simplest, probably the simplest idea, but it's so effective, and like that it has had such an effect on our culture, just the way that we perceive pop music. You use the term verse chorus, right? Again, as my class knows, like every pop song, about 90% of the pop songs that you listen to on the radio all follow the exact same form. It's like
Mhm.
verse, chorus, bridge, chorus.
Yep.
That's it. Uh, there was this really funny video actually I showed my class of it's Dave Grohl and Kyle Gass, and they're talking about how to make like a hit song, right?
Mhm.
And one thing that Dave Grohl, he facetiously says this, but it's like it's so true. Basically he says like every hit song, it's like it's all just a chorus. Like everything about the song is the chorus. Like Janie's got a gun. Everyone knows that line. Da
Yeah.
da 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 da. But no one knows the verses to that. And he starts talking about like just Aerosmith songs and how it's like everything. It's like every great Aerosmith song is just chorus. All the hits. And something else that he says I think is really it hits hard, but he says the deep cuts don't keep the mansion rolling. It's like, man,
Yeah.
that's so true.
Yeah, that's funny that you said deep cuts. That is a term that I literally learned yesterday. And so for you to
Oh,
say that today, for some reason I never heard that. And someone said it to me
yeah.
yesterday, and I had to like promptly look it up. One thing that's funny, I'll say, I might get these songs wrong. I don't know the Billie Eilish tune, but I know it's the one that was really popular from hers.
Yeah, I don't know.
And the other one would be, I think it's Sicko Mode, the other tune I'm thinking of. But these are songs that have they have like a section, and then there's just a weird break, and the entire song changes. And it's like
Whoa.
completely unrelated, something that had happened for the first 45 seconds or however long, and then the rest
Sure.
of the song happens. And those are like the most jarring songs on the radio because
Yeah.
there's like you've completely defied expectation. I think it's really kind of a neat thing. I don't know, like who knows if that's going to stick? Who knows if that's relevant? I mean, it made it to the
Well,
radio, but
so I mean, you bring that up. So I'm not really familiar with much pop music. I hate to admit, but I mean, you bring that up, and it's like that's really no different than what Beethoven was doing, man. Like
yeah,
his the sonata in C minor, it just has this like really slow introduction that has nothing to do with the rest of the piece, and it's like a minute of music,
hmm,
and then suddenly the rest of the piece starts, right? And it's like that thing kind of comes back every now and again, but it's like the rest of the piece has nothing to do with that section. And so like I guess anything that you can do to just build interest.
yeah,
I remember being in college when dubstep was like becoming a thing, and the idea of like the beat dropping, that was like a big deal at the time because it was like, you know, it would sort of like build up to this point, and everything cuts out, and then the beat just happens,
Yeah.
and it's like it was just this moment that sort of takes you by surprise, and it pumps you up, and like again, this stuff has not changed for a really long time.
Well, yeah, I mean that's your perfect authentic cadence. And what's the your deceptive cadence is when the beat doesn't drop and they prolong you, or that's a
Right.
fake out. I mean, it really is that.
Yeah,
It,
yeah. It's funny,
every,
man.
it's all expectation or subverting expectation, tension and release. Those things have never and will never change about music. I truly believe that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Tension
and
and release, man. That's what it's all about, really.
Yeah, and form is one of the most underappreciated things I think as a student. Like you go through music and the things that are clear to you uh, as you're grinding through your scales in the practice room and everything else. The clear things are rhythm and melody and like shaping and phrasing, and the least clear thing, at least for me, and I think for many others, is form because it seems
Because it
secondary.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah, it happens on such a large scale, and like you're always in it, like here, Whereas the form is just it happens over
yeah.
time,
But when you can out of body experience, when
Mhm.
you can astrally project, right, and get
Uh,
out and look at the music from a much wider perspective, and you can see the form. Like the minute that I started doing that at the end of my sort of time in school was like when everything opened up to me because then I started thinking about, okay, big picture, breaking things into sections in my mind, and you start webbing out the pieces, micro phrases, all the way up to the big arc of the piece, and that matters because that's what the audience is going to take away. Like at the end of the day, you can miss melodic notes and you can fudge rhythms, but if your form sucks and the direction of your piece, as
yeah,
an audience member, you're checked out. So I
yeah,
think
right.
form sells tickets, and that's why like I talked to Colin Curry. He's the number one percussion soloist in the world, touring as a concerto soloist with orchestras. And the most important thing he always talks about is like clear and definitive and readable form for an audience member. Like we
Hmm.
talk about it, he's like the form of this piece is great, and when he says that, I like that's going to be a good piece, you
Right,
know,
right.
for these new concertos that he's getting written for him. But I
Well,
digress.
yeah. I mean that idea, the idea of form, that's a again a very old idea, and the way that I always approach it, I guess, is that form is essentially the formula for a piece of music, right? It's it's the a squared plus b squared equals c squared for a piece of music, Like
Hmm.
once you have that large scale form, it's almost like as a composer, it's like painting by numbers in a way. It's like great, I know what I want this section to do.
Hmm.
Now just put the notes in, and like kind of see if it works. And if it doesn't, great. I'm just going to change some of these notes and then kind of try it again. But like the form is still there. I think that is a such an important part of, well, not just music either, just art in general.
Yeah.
One of the things that my class we sort of dig into is like sonata allegro form, right? This is like every music student form 101, right? First thing we kind of ever talk about, sonata allegro form, right? You have those three big parts. But something that I have come to this realization, I guess, in the past couple of years is that it's really just like writing a paper or like a story, because like the very first part of your form is called the exposition,
Hmm.
right? And what happens in an exposition of a story or a TV show or a movie? Like it sets up all the characters, it sets up the scene, sets up the mood. Like you know exactly what's going to happen after the exposition.
Hmm.
And then it's like the body of your paper, right? This is basically exposition is what I'm going to tell you, right? And then it's like here is what I am telling you. And it's like that's where all the stuff happens. And then you like recap everything and you close it off and it's like this is what I have just said. So like
Yeah.
none of that changes between different art forms. It's like that idea of like form, I guess it's so important just for art in general.
Hmm. Yeah, and when you listen to a piece of music and you get from beginning to end and you don't remember anything that happened, that's because the form wasn't good. Like
Yeah,
I
right.
truly believe that. If there are things, if there are pillar moments that you can point to once you finish listening to a piece, and I don't mean passively listening. I mean you need to be actively listening.
Sure, sure.
But I can actively listen to some music that has very little uh, readable form for the listener, and like you get to the end and you're like, yeah, that wasn't memorable. And if you go
Yeah.
back and you look at the not discography, but you know what I'm saying, like the works list of these composers, famous
Yeah.
composers. There's a lot of unplayed works on there, and if you listen to them, they're not memorable.
Right. It's like there's a reason that these kind of have gotten lost to time.
Yeah, and I mean some of that, yeah, maybe the motives weren't great, or maybe
Sure.
the thematic development, but by and large, I think there's many form issues in a lot of those pieces. I would
Yeah.
say. And
Man, so the caveat here, this is entirely opinionated at this point, right? But I mean, I agree a lot with what you're saying here. For instance, like those sort of late romantic tone poems where it's like there's no form, they're just writing music, and it's like all these motives keep sort of coming out and reappearing, or like the music of Wagner is just so indicative of this, and it's like it's so just forgetful, I guess. It's like it's so easy just to like check out and then just kind of come back in and it's like, oh, we're still doing this thing, cool,
yeah,
fall back asleep again. And like, and you know, in the case of these late romantic works, it's like 14 hours of just this formless soup, you know. By the end of it, you finally get like a tonic chord and you're like, oh god, it's over finally, thanks. And
yeah.
like, let's go home and do anything else now.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like I don't get to study music that often anymore, and I wish I could like more intelligently speak to that in particular. But it's what's funny is like you do realize though that the late romantic period. I mean, there's a reason that it hit a wall and hit an extreme, and then we emancipated our tonality and all this stuff, right? There's a
Right.
reason that we got to that breaking point though, and it's because we took these things too far. And that's what we pretty
Yeah.
much do in all of these eras.
Right.
I think we find the extreme of something and we move on. Um, yeah,
Yeah, no, and we're definitely in this like gray area right now of like what is music, you know? Because like the 20th century kind of ruined a lot of stuff. I feel like for just artists,
mm,
uh, things got way too like I feel like philosophy, science, and art got like too interconnected, and they all had to like have this crazy relationship, and it all had to mean something. Whereas like at the end of the day, man, if it sounds good, it sounds good, you know? And like I don't know. Right now, I feel like we are in this weird gray area of like nothing is wrong, you know. So like
yeah,
you can kind of do anything with art, right? But it's like, is it enjoyable? You know, are people gonna want to listen to it?
yeah. What's the zeitgeist of like right now in our music? Whether that's academic music or whatever. Like what is it? And I really don't know.
Yeah,
And maybe we won't know for 100 years until we can look back on it with 2020 vision. I don't know,
right,
or when the whole
right.
period is ended and it can be encapsulated, like we can look at the 1800s or whatever. But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, you look at it, at least while we're in it now, and it's like I couldn't tell you what is standout or indicative of what we're doing right now because I mean, with the advent of the internet, there's so much happening that
yeah,
and everybody has a voice and everybody's stuff is out there now. Who knows how you could ever possibly categorize this period of music? I don't know.
yeah. Right. I had this discussion with my comp teacher several years ago when I was finishing up grad school, and
Mhm.
one of the things that he sort of said was that you know, we're not going to be able to figure out what we were doing until many years. Like someone else is going to figure out what we were doing. You know, it seems like the I don't know, the 20th century just ruined so much stuff for a lot of people. Like we got really into this idea of like everything has to be categorized and everything has to have a name, and you got to like it can't just exist. You have to know why it exists, and there's so many. Which I mean, it's not a bad thing by any means. It's like it's important to know those things, but I feel like people get too wrapped up in that sort of like like labeling what it is, and you know the idea of like genre and style and like you know for instance, like even in the pop world, like genre has gotten like ridiculous. You know, you have this like post pop punk hardcore crab metal. You know, and it's like
Yeah.
what like it's not just rock music anymore. It's like no. It's post pop punk hardcore crab metal. It's
Yeah.
like okay, I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Anyway, well,
Cool,
that's
man.
really all I got. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about like your experience with some of this stuff, kind of see your thoughts,
Yeah.
dig into some of this stuff. Before we go, do you have any just closing thoughts about any of what we talked about, or just music in general, anything you want to talk about?
Are your students majors or non-majors?
Non-majors.
Non-majors. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. I always just try to tell people in school there's a bigger picture to everything that's going on. Especially when I'm talking to musicians, it's like what we kind of mentioned. You're in the weeds, you're thinking about all this stuff, but like at the end of the day, you're going to deal with much bigger problems than like, did I hit that B flat in that piece? Like you're going to be dealing with whether or not you're selling tickets and what the big picture of a lot of these things are and what art is and all this kind of stuff, what your voice as an artist. And I think a lot of that can translate to people who aren't musicians too,
I agree
in their,
100%.
in their careers. So I don't know. I think just having a more macro view of everything in
Yeah.
life is better than the micro view.
Like what are your end goals? I feel like that's kind of, I feel like at least that's what you're trying to like get at here. Like what like what is it that you're trying to do with whatever it is you're doing?
Yeah.
Uh, which I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense to anybody who's not an artist, but for most musicians and artists, it's like, oh yeah, what am I trying to do with whatever it is I'm doing?
Yeah. Oh yeah, very existential.
Yeah,
Every
right,
day's
right.
a new crisis.
Yeah, man.
So I don't know. I mean,
I
that's
guess
all.
for my students, I'm not going to say his name, but I got a student that like he sells cell phones. Basically, he sells cell phones at some store. I don't remember what it is. It's like what is your goal with that? Like why are you trying to sell these cell phones? Like what is your end goal with this job, right? Or like why are you going to school? What is your end goal with going to school? Like what is your purpose here? I don't know. That's what I'm getting out of what you're saying here. Maybe I'm 100% wrong. I don't know.
I don't know. I guess I'm speaking a lot to artists. I guess it's easy
Yeah,
to
right.
talk to artists about it, but
But I mean, art can be found in so many different
mhm.
worlds. I mean, a car mechanic is an artist. Like the way that people sort of take apart something. There's art in that. Because art and science, as much as I just said, no, they shouldn't be related. They really are related. Like there's not that much difference between like different like math and music, for instance. Like there are so many more similarities that I find every day. How do I say this? There are less differences, I guess, between the two every day. You
Mm.
know, it just seems to be like I find something new about how to apply these ideas, I guess. Anyway,
Yeah.
well, yeah, man. Cameron, thank you so much for your time. I know you're really strapped for it right now.
Hey, no, it's good. I've just been shooting a lot of podcast episodes to try to keep
Yeah,
myself and yeah, I've got to, it's this is a weird thing, this COVID thing, in terms of like I've got a lot of time now, and I'm actually like really excited to use it, and I have a like
yeah,
2 mile long list of things that I haven't been able to do because I've been on tour and all this stuff that I'm finally going to be able to do. But
right,
I have
right,
like one live stream concert coming up in 10 days, and it's like I'm grateful for the opportunity, but it's awkwardly stressing me out because I'm like, I wish I had nothing on my calendar officially, so that way I could just not worry about uh,
right.
a thing and just do what I want to do for the next few months. But I'm gonna get through that, uh, and then yeah, pursue some other things. But it's
Hey, so real quick though, with this live stream concert, is this like a ticketed event? Is this going to be available to anybody? Can anybody watch this?
yeah, it's gonna be free. I don't know if it's gonna be. I mean, I'm sure I'll advertise it, but I don't
Yeah.
know if it's hosted on my page or if it's gonna be hosted on the people who are kind of funding its page.
Okay.
So if it would be on their page, it would either be the Johnstone Fund for New Music or the Streetlight Guild. One of those two. It's kind of murky uh,
Okay.
where this is going to go up. But yeah, it's going to be from my basement actually, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be at an off-campus location or at a venue, I guess. But then
Yeah. But then COVID.
well, even with it, they were like, "We'll just do it there," and then they're like, "Actually, just stay home and try to do it." So I ordered all these mics so I could make all this happen.
Yeah. Right. That's cool though, man. I don't know. I'm going to plug it for my class, and
Yeah.
because they need to like watch performances anyway. So yeah, man.
It'll be a cool little gig. I'll be
Yeah.
doing a lot of different stuff than I normally do. So
Very cool, man. Very
yeah.
cool. Well, again, Cameron, thank you so much for your time. Well, go ahead and send me links to any like videos or social media that you kind of want to send out, I guess, and I'll include them with this video, and you know, just try to, I don't know, get the word out about who
Yeah,
you are. And
totally. Yeah,
right
Instagram
on.
my main thing for sure. So I'm easy to find. C Leach Music is everything, you know. So
Yeah.
uh, cool, man. Well, thanks and thanks everybody for your time. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk at you a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well,
All right,
I'm gonna
thanks.
stop this recording now.
Yeah.
Cool. And YouTube.